Okay, let's kick things off with a thought experiment. Imagine your kid, maybe early teens, comes to you really excited about this wild idea.
Okay.
They've apparently been offered a spot on a mission to Mars.
Wow, Mars. Seriously.
Seriously. And the reason, apparently, is that kids their age adapt way better to the low gravity during puberty. You know, that growth spurt phase.
Huh. Okay, that's a novel recruitment strategy.
Right. And their friends are supposedly going, they're begging you, please let me go. So before you just say no, you decide to look into it.
You'd have to, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And you find out there's this theory that if they go through puberty on Mars, their bodies will permanently adapt, unlike adults.
So they'd be Martians, physiologically speaking.
Kinda, yeah. But coming back to Earth, that's a big question mark. Still unknown.
You know, that whole scenario, as out there as it sounds, it actually kind of mirrors a really profound shift that's already happened for a whole generation right here. Well, think about it. A radically different environment during those key developmental years, big physiological changes happening during adolescence, and a lot of uncertainty about the long-term effects.
Exactly. And that right there, that's the core of what we're digging into today. We're exploring what Jonathan Haidt calls the great rewiring of childhood, specifically for the generation born after 1995, Gen Z. It's almost like they're the first generation growing up on Mars, metaphorically speaking.
Right. Not physically Mars, but in a childhood landscape shaped by totally new forces, things previous generations just didn't experience.
Yeah. And our listener provided excerpts from Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. So our mission here is to really unpack his main ideas about this rewiring.
What's driving it? What are the impacts he's identifying? That's the plan.
This great rewiring. Haidt says it's basically driven by two big trends happening at the same time. First, just this massive change in technology. And second, a shift in how we actually raise kids in the real world. More protection, less independence.
And the timing is really key, isn't it? The oldest Gen Zers started hitting puberty around, 2009?
Yeah, about then.
And if you think about what else was happening, you had high-speed internet becoming common in the 2000s. Then the iPhone launched in 2007.
Game changer.
Huge game changer. And then around 2009, you get the rise of really hyper-viral social media, with the introduction of things like the like and retweet buttons.
Those buttons, it's funny, they seem so simple, almost trivial.
Deceptively simple.
Yeah, but Haidt argues they fundamentally changed how we interact online, and he really emphasizes that Gen Z are, they're kind of the pioneers here.
The first ones through the gate.
Exactly. The first generation to go through adolescence in this completely new environment, which is just so different from the real-world face-to-face stuff that shaped human development for millennia.
Which brings us neatly to the second part of that rewiring, the big decline in free play in the physical world, that is.
Right. And Haidt pulls from research on all sorts of young mammals, including us. And the point is that unstructured play is just fundamental for brain development. Kids, young animals, they learn crucial social, cognitive, emotional skills through just messing around.
Yeah. It's that repeated activity, getting feedback. But in a situation where the stakes are low, kittens play fighting to learn hunting skills or toddlers figuring out how to move their bodies.
And it's not just physical skills, is it? He mentions Peter Gray's work.
Oh yeah, Gray's great on play.
And highlights how important multiplayer games are. Even things like, playful arguments or teasing. That's how kids learn cooperation, how to manage themselves in a group, how to sort out conflicts.
It's basically social skills practice, learning the rules of the road through doing.
But this free play, it started disappearing, right? Haidt says this wasn't like an overnight thing.
No, he traces it back further. It apparently started declining back in the 1980s and then really picked up speed in the 90s.
So what was going on then? Why the decline?
A big piece of it, he argues, was this growing fear about stranger danger.
Ah, right, I remember that.
Yeah, the media, the news cycles, they really amplified those fears. Haidt even points out how the phrase stranger danger started showing up way more in kids' books around that time.
So parents got more anxious about letting kids play outside unsupervised.
Exactly. They pulled them indoors more. And just as that outdoor unsupervised time was shrinking.
What filled the gap?
Well, personal computers were becoming more common, so they offered this, alternative way for kids to spend their free time indoors.
So even before smartphones, the ground was already shifting. Childhood was changing.
Definitely. The stage was being set, you could say.
Which leads us to a really concerning part of Haidt's analysis.
Yeah.
This huge spike in anxiety and depression among young people.
Yeah, the data he presents is, well, it's pretty stark. Figure 1.1 comma, for example.
What does that show?
It shows this really sudden, really large jump in major depressive episodes reported by U.S. teens ages 12 to 17, and it starts right around 2012.
How big a jump are we talking?
Roughly 150% increase. For both boys and girls, that's significant.
Wow. Yeah, that's not a small fluctuation.
Not at all. And figure 1.3 shows that this surge is really concentrated in Gen Z and the younger millennials. The youngest groups seem to be showing the biggest rise in feeling nervous, anxious.
And anxiety, Haidt explains, it's not just worrying, right? It shows up physically too.
Oh yeah, physically like tension, restlessness, emotionally that sense of dread, worry, just feeling exhausted. And cognitively, you get rumination, negative thought loops, sometimes distortions, like catastrophizing, always expecting the worst.
And depression, how does he define that?
Well, major depressive disorder, MDD, the key things are persistent low mood and losing interest or pleasure in almost everything. That feeling of like nothing matters anymore.
He quotes Shakespeare, doesn't he, to capture that feeling?
Yeah, that sense of weariness with the world. And these symptoms have to be there for at least 2 weeks for a diagnosis.
And crucially, he links depression really tightly with our social connections.
Yes, that's a really important point in his argument. Social isolation can feed into depression, but depression also makes it harder to connect with people.
Creating this kind of vicious cycle.
Exactly. A downward spiral of disconnection. And that theme, the link between social life and mental well-being, comes up again and again.
Absolutely. Okay, so you can't really talk about this great rewiring without diving into smartphones and social media. They're kind of central.
Totally central. And Haidt includes this chart, figure 1.6 comma, showing smartphone adoption after 2007. And it just skyrockets, right? It's that classic hockey stick curve, just zooms up as the technology takes hold.
And his argument is that this shift, this move to a phone-based childhood, basically added hours of screen time every day.
Yeah, on average, he estimates an extra 2 to 3 hours of screen-based activity per day compared to life before smartphones.
Activity, not just passive watching.
Right. Scrolling, gaming, interacting online. And he does point out it varies by socioeconomic status, race, sexual minority status. Some groups saw an even bigger jump in screen time.
Now, he also looks at other possible explanations for the rise in anxiety and depression. Like, what about big world events? 9/11, the financial crisis.
Yeah, he addresses those. But his point is, those events would have hit millennials hardest during their adolescence, and you didn't see the same kind of mental health crisis spike for them back then.
Okay, fair point. What about climate change? That comes up a lot.
It does. And Haidt acknowledges, look, these concerns are real and valid for young people. But he argues, historically, these big collective threats don't usually cause widespread rises in diagnosed mental illness.
What does then, in his view?
Things like isolation, loneliness, feeling like you don't have control, like you're ineffective. And those, he believes, are the very things the Great Rewiring has amplified for Gen Z.
And it's not just happening in the US, is it?
No, that's another key piece of evidence he highlights. You see very similar trends: rising anxiety, depression, self-harm in other English-speaking countries, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand.
He shows data for Canada, I think.
Yeah. Figure 1.8 shows Canadian girls reporting lower mental health after 2011. It suggests this is a broader phenomenon linked to something shared across these cultures, likely the technological shifts.
Not just specific national issues.
Right. It strengthens the case that something fundamental changed around that 2010 to 2012 period, coinciding with the mass adoption of smartphones and social media by teens.
So if smartphones and social media are so central, how exactly does Haidt think they're impacting development? He uses this term, experience blockers.
Yeah, experience blockers. It's a pretty evocative phrase.
What does he mean by that?
Basically, that the sheer amount of time spent on phones, often alone, watching videos, scrolling feeds, actively blocks or displaces the kinds of experiences kids need for healthy development.
Experiences they'd normally get in the real world.
Exactly. Real-world interaction is embodied. You're physically present. It's synchronous, happening in real time. It's usually one-on-one or in small groups. The digital world often lacks those features.
He has that analogy, doesn't he, about teaching kids to walk.
Right. It's like giving babies iPads with videos about walking, but then being surprised they can't actually walk because they haven't, practiced walking.
They haven't done the stumbling and falling and getting up again.
Precisely. The addictive design of platforms pulls kids away from that essential face-to-face play and real-world practice.
And he talks about serve and return interactions in early childhood, that back and forth.
Yes, that's crucial. That call and response between a child and caregiver builds fundamental social skills, attunement. A screen media to childhood can disrupt that vital process.
It messes with the natural sequence of development.
Kind of. Development happens in stages, with sensitive periods for learning certain things. A phone-based childhood throws kids into this complex online social world, maybe before they have the grounding from real-world interaction.
So instead of figuring out who they are and how to get along with people through, playground arguments and making friends,
their identity and social standing get shaped by posts, comments, likes, follower counts. It's all mediated, judged by metrics, often by strangers. Haidt sees this as a potential deprivation, a thinning out of childhood.
And he flags 4 specific harms from this phone-based childhood, right? Though maybe we dive deeper another time.
Yeah, he introduces them as foundational harms: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction, key areas of concern.
He has this phrase about learning, the wearing smooth of a path in the brain.
Yes, that repeated activity strengthens neural pathways. So hours and hours of swiping, scrolling, clicking, that's wearing certain pathways very smooth indeed.
And the time commitment is just huge. You mentioned the hours.
It's staggering. Around 40 hours a week for preteens, up to 50 hours for teens. Just on-screen-based leisure. That's like a full-time job's worth of time.
Wow. And it's not accidental that kids spend so much time. No. Haidt argues it's very much by design. He talks about persuasive technology, companies using behavioral psychology to hook users. Like the techniques BJ Fogg taught, he mentions him.
Yeah, and points out that one of Instagram's co-founders actually took Fogg's class on persuasive tech. It's about building habits, triggering behaviors.
And it taps into dopamine, right? That reward chemical?
Exactly. He references NLMK's work on addiction here. Dopamine isn't just about pleasure. It's about wanting, craving more, which is how you get these behavioral addictions, similar loops to gambling.
Complete withdrawal if you take the phone away. Like feeling anxious or irritable.
Yes, those are common signs he points to.
Now, Haidt also makes a point that this whole rewiring didn't affect boys and girls in exactly the same way.
Right. He observes that around 2013, after smartphones really took off among teens, psychiatric wards started seeing a much bigger increase in girls needing help compared to boys.
Why does he think girls were disproportionately affected, especially initially?
His argument centers on social media. He suggests girls are exposed to constant social comparison, especially around appearance and popularity, unrealistic beauty standards, seeing curated perfect lives.
Leading to what he calls a sociometer plunge, like a hit to their self-esteem.
Yeah, a sense of where they stand socially takes a nosedive, and the nature of conflict changed too.
How so?
Well, face-to-face bullying seems to have decreased, especially for boys. Cyberbullying surged, and it hit girls particularly hard. It's relentless, inescapable.
And he talks about something even stranger, mass social media-induced illness.
Yes. These bizarre phenomena, like sudden outbreaks of hysteretic disorders where groups of girls, often in different places, start exhibiting the same tics, like shouting specific words.
Like Beans, wasn't that one example? Yeah.
Apparently influenced by a specific social media influencer. And he also discusses a possible rise in self-diagnosed dissociative identity disorder, potentially linked to content on platforms like TikTok.
That's really concerning. Wild.
It is. And the data on friendships seems to back up this idea of growing isolation paradoxically.
Paradoxically because they're on social media.
Exactly. Figures 6.6 and 6.7 show that after 2012, fewer high school seniors said they had a few close friends and more reported feeling lonely.
So the more connected online?
The lonelier and more depressed they felt, on average. It's a stark finding.
Okay. So what about the boys? How does Haidt see the impact on them?
For boys, he argues it's a slightly different mix of factors. There's the general trend of increased safetyism, keeping them indoors more, but also maybe a sense of declining societal value for traditional masculinity, combined with the really powerful pull of the virtual world, especially online gaming and pornography.
Right. He mentions that boys were maybe drawn to screens earlier anyway, like arcade games, early computers.
Yeah, there's maybe an earlier affinity, but the internet brought easy, anonymous access to pornography on a scale never seen before.
And he cites data suggesting that's had a real impact.
Yes. He points to a Swedish study showing a big jump in daily porn consumption among boys and raises concerns about how that might shape their developing sexuality and ability to form healthy real-world relationships.
So boys are struggling too, but maybe it shows up differently. Less in anxiety spikes, more in disengagement.
That seems to be his argument. Loneliness is up for them too, but maybe it manifests more as a withdrawal from the real world, declining academic success, things like that. He uses the term anime.
Anime, what's that?
It's a sociological term, basically meaning normlessness, a sense of being adrift because the old social rules and structures are breaking down, replaced by these fast-changing, often superficial online networks.
Which can lead to feeling lost, meaningless.
Potentially, yes, and he connects the sense of anime and disconnection for both sexes to the tragic rise in suicidal ideation we've seen.
It's a pretty bleak picture overall.
It is. And then he takes it a step further, moving beyond just clinical mental health.
How so?
He suggests this phone-based life leads to something broader, which he calls spiritual degradation.
Spiritual degradation, that sounds...
Heavy. It is. He contrasts the kinds of fleeting connections you get in online networks with the deeper bonds of real-world communities.
What's the key difference for him?
Communities often have shared rituals, shared sacred times and places, things that are set apart, made special. He mentions the Hebrew word kadosh.
Meaning holy or set apart.
Right. These things give structure, meaning a sense of belonging. The virtual world, he argues, tends to flatten everything out. It's this constant, undifferentiated blur. No real beginning or end, no truly shared sacred space.
I see. It lacks structure.
Yeah, and he links this to brain function too. Specifically, the default mode network, the DMN.
That's the part of the brain that's active when we're mind-wandering, thinking about ourselves.
Exactly. And social media, being so focused on the self, our posts, our image, what others think of us, tends to keep that DMN buzzing constantly.
Which makes it harder to
achieve moments of self-transcendence, to feel connected to something larger than yourself, whether it's nature, community, a higher purpose. That requires quieting the ego, the self-focus.
He brings in ideas from Buddhism and Taoism here, doesn't he? Yeah, about the ego.
Yes, about letting go of judgment, quieting the inner critic. He even references Jesus' Sermon on the Mount about not judging others.
Because social media kind of encourages constant, instant judgment.
Very much so. It feeds into that intuition's first, strategic reasoning second model he's known for. Quick takes, strong opinions, often based on limited information.
So what's the antidote or part of it? He mentions awe, right?
Yeah. He highlights research like Dr. Keltner's work on awe walks, getting out in nature, experiencing something vast and beautiful.
What does that do?
It seems to shift our neurophysiology. It reduces that self-focus, makes us feel more connected to others, more pro-social, and boosts our sense of meaning in life.
Just by taking a walk and paying attention.
Essentially, yes. It comes back to this fundamental idea he emphasizes, quoting thinkers from Buddha to Marcus Aurelius. What we pay attention to, what we expose our minds to, fundamentally shapes who we become.
Wow, okay, so can we try to pull all this together? Yeah. This mini-book podcast immersion into Haidt's work paints a picture of a really profound shift, this great rewiring.
Yeah, it's not just about kids using phones more, it's about a fundamental change in the environment they grew up in, driven by tech, but also by changes in parenting and real-world experiences.
With really significant consequences for mental health, social development, and maybe even, as he puts it, their spiritual well-being.
It's a complex picture with many interacting parts.
Which kind of leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big question, doesn't it? Well, if Haidt's analysis is even partly right, if these changes are having such a big impact, what's our responsibility here as parents, educators, as a society? How do we understand this and maybe potentially reshape things for kids growing up now and in the future?
Yeah, that's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? Definitely something to chew on.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Mini Book Podcast, a deep dive into Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation and the profound cultural shifts shaping Gen Z.
If this exploration made you think, sparked a new perspective, or just helped connect some dots, we'd love for you to support the show. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone you think would appreciate it. It helps more than you know.
Thanks for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay curious and keep reading between the lines.